You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast hosted by Matt Franks and Zach Bechtold. We hope you enjoy this week's show, and you can find out more about us by going online at beardedtheologians.com, where you can pick up a few t-shirts, listen to a few old episodes, and find ways that you can connect with us. Thank you for listening. You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast hosted by Matt Franks
and Zach Bechtold.
So this week on the podcast, we're going to talk about what does it mean to be an unanxious presence. Zach, as you think about that, what comes to mind for you?
So many things. But really before we hit record, it's kind of the impetus of this conversation was a post that I saw on Facebook for my friend Joe Donatone, a seminary friend of mine, who shared a post from a lady named Debbie down in Florida, and about the pending hurricane headed their direction. And essentially Debbie's plea or request was from those of us that don't live in Florida to know that they're okay and they're prepared. She, in a pretty long post, she essentially says, "Dear everyone that doesn't live in Florida, but loves someone who does, here are some things you need to know about hurricanes. They don't come until they come. Hurricanes are unpredictable, and an entire state can't evacuate. And we truly appreciate your love and concern. The offers to stay in your homes, etc., all of those things, know that we appreciate that. But know the national media is doing a pretty good job of stirring up your anxiety. Our local weather teams are much calmer and more knowledgeable about the hurricanes that affect our area, and they are working nonstop to give us updates and telling us to prepare, and we trust them. When the tie comes off and the sleeves are rolled up and we're told to hunker down, we'll be ready. And of course we're worried, but we're trying to do all the right things to prepare and not freak out. And thanks for offering words of love and encouragement and not jumping on the freak out wagon. It just makes it harder on us." And I really, really appreciated that post, and my buddy Joe just giving me, someone who doesn't live in Florida, never has, the opportunity to remember, and as he says, managing our pre-hurricane anxiety is difficult for those of us who, for the folks that live there. And then the reminder that those of us, when we have anxiety and we're not there, we sometimes make it worse in the ways and how we reach out, well-meaning as they are. Sometimes we add to that anxiety. And so it just got me thinking about how do we be a non-anxious presence even when we want to help, even when it's well-meaning, and that just little reminder to say, hey, these people have folks around them, folks that go through natural disasters, whether they be tornadoes or hurricanes or earthquakes, some predictable and some not. The ways in which we respond as people on the outside looking in are vastly important. And then when we kind of narrow that down into our day-to-day lives, the way that we respond to folks in our own lives and our communities when they're going through their own tragedies and disasters, how we respond and how we show up matters. And if we show up with high anxiety, thinking we know the situation, thinking we know how to fix it or how to tell somebody to survive a hurricane when we've never even, when we're landlocked, right? Doesn't help. That high anxiety just brings more anxiety to an already anxious situation. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot to think about how we as people show up with non-anxious presence that really makes or breaks a situation.
Well, you nailed it on the head. It's about how do we show up in the midst of a thing when we want to help, but maybe we don't have what's needed.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to we really, in these kind of situations, we should be more in an active listening space where we're listening to care, not listen to respond or to fix. because it's easy for us to know that, hey, there's going to be flooding, there's going to be disasters, and all these things. I can go do that, but that hasn't happened yet, and it may not happen. Like my sister lives in Jacksonville, and so like every time these come up, hey, just checking in on you, how you doing, like what's going
Mm-hmm.
on, and she fills us in, like, hey, here's what's going on. But I think that when we enter into that space of listening to care, not listen to fix,
Mm-hmm.
it can help us be in those spaces of like really how to be connected, but also um, realizing that maybe what you have to offer may not be what's needed, but just listening and being present. Um, I always call it the anti-Job friends,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
not saying, just, Job's friends, we're telling Job to curse God and die, and Job's like, no, relented. And we don't have to have the answer, but we just can say, hey, I'm here for you. Like,
Right.
and then, nice, healthy follow-up afterwards is fine. But I also think that we have to be in that space of listening to care. I always say listen to care
Mm-hmm.
versus listening to fix, and to understand that there's a difference between the two is
Right.
vital.
And we look at something like hurricanes and the two, the one that we've just had and the one that's pending, right, and building out in the Gulf. Um, the questions of why don't you just leave? Why don't you just move? Why do you? Those aren't helpful
No.
questions. And we've talked ad nauseum on this podcast about just don't say anything. If you feel like you have to say something, you probably shouldn't say anything and just listen. And we usually talk about it in the context of death and grieving and things like that. That sometimes we show up with well-meaning intentions and wanting to be present for people, and we feel like we have to say something, and we end up saying unhelpful things.
Yeah.
And that that is the anxious presence that we're kind of chatting about today. Of when you feel like you have to say something, don't, because it's probably not a helpful thing to say. Whatever it is, whatever situation, maybe that's our cue to just be present and listen and hold sacred space for people, and realize that it's probably the 10,000th time somebody has said to somebody going through a hurricane of, why don't you just move? Why don't you just leave? And we forget that their lives are there, their loved ones are there, work is there, right? Like it's the same reasons we don't move out of the cold or out of Tornado Alley, or, maybe people financially can't, right? Like there's a
Yeah.
million different reasons as to why, that are none of our business. And holding that space just to listen rather than respond, so sacred.
Well, and that's why, like, really, we have to pick our poison when it comes to living within it. So, like, we must acknowledge that climate change is a big part of some of the things that
Hmm.
were going on that are happening today,
Hmm.
and that um, really, uh, just saying, like, understanding that, yeah, not everybody can just pick up and move to the high ground or to wherever. That
Hmm.
there are certain situations that just are that put people in those spaces.
Hmm.
I think that that's definitely, and it's kind of one of those things like to understand, to know, to understand, is very. It goes back to what I said: listen to care, not listen to fix.
Hmm.
And you know, uh, as we think about this, like Zach, where have you seen this in Scripture?
Uh, we see it. It's You mentioned Job and his friends, right? Like Job's friends don't approach Job with a non-anxious present, right? They spend like 40 chapters and just giving Job the wrong thing. Um, and we see it pretty big there. Um, but really, you want to look at the obvious answer of who does this. It's Jesus, right? Jesus shows up all over the Gospels with a non-anxious presence, right? Think of all of the times people come up to him and ask him to heal their loved ones, and touch his robe, things like that. Really, probably the picture that I or the story that I recognize the most is uh, raising Lazarus from the dead, right? And not so much how Jesus responds, because that's the obvious answer, but how Thomas responds. as they begin the journey to go to Lazarus. They get word that he's sick, and the other disciples don't want to go, not because of Lazarus, but because of they're afraid of the religious elite. And Thomas is the one that stands up and says, "If we're gonna die, let's today be the day, right? Let's go now and face our fate, because our friend is not well. Let's follow Jesus into this space, and in that non-anxious presence of here's who we're called to be. Let's get up and go, and be in the space that we've been called to." And then he, gets a bad rap later on, but that's my favorite Thomas story, and just that willingness to show up and say, "Okay, I'm here. Let's go." And not make a just to be not anxious. What about you, Matt?
Part of me wanted to say when the storm's happening and Jesus kind of just
Yeah.
like, you know,
When he's sleeping on the bottom of the boat?
yeah. Uh, I think
Yeah.
that's kind of a space of that sometimes there are disasters that are not really disasters and we just need to roll with it. And
Hmm.
but I also think too, like we um there's a sense of that in the Psalms of just the cry out and the
Hmm.
lament,
Hmm.
but also like asking the question. You see it over and over in the book of Psalm, that where does my help come from?
Hmm.
And the writer responds like the help comes from the Lord. We see that over and over again. To me, there's a sense of being an unanxious presence there,
Hmm.
of how the writer is writing this out, these laments, or these just praises or whatever, however you want to look at them. But to me, that's where I can also find some of that space that I didn't have before. Like, you can find some acts of peace there within
Hmm.
those. So
Well, I think the big thing when we talk about anxiety is to name that anxiety is not bad. It's a part of who we are created to be. It's a part of being fully human, right? It's something that we feel. And so for those of us that are anxious girlies, right, that we're just anxious people, that's okay. I think what Matt and I are trying to shed some light on is how we show up in those spaces with other people, um, like our siblings who are preparing for hurricanes right now and anxious about it, to not make things worse because of our own anxiety on the outside looking in, and show up in helpful and hopeful and healthy ways. And sometimes that means not saying anything.
I also think it's that act of being present
Hmm.
without like just showing up. Like
Hmm.
just show up and show up in a way that where you just are there and
Hmm.
you're attending to the needs that you see or hear or feel.
Hmm.
And you don't have to show up with any kind of program. And I know like that's kind of how I handle my pastoral care model, is that when I show up for a hospital visit or a nursing home visit or a home visit, I'm not there for any other reason but just
Hmm.
to be, you've either asked for it or I know there's a need for me to be there and I'm going to be there
Right.
regardless. And just to be there as unanxious as I can and help answer or help direct or guide in any way that I can or
Hmm.
know. And I have always found that to be extremely healthy and helpful versus just coming in with a whole program or a whole mindset that is very unhealthy and very
Hmm.
hurtful towards those that we're meeting with. And I that's just kind of how handle it.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's a valuable conversation, and I appreciate those folks that have shed some light, especially in light of the current events and going ons in the world, to point to how the world has changed, how climate has changed, and how it's affecting the lives of many, many people, and how we can show up in hopeful and helpful spaces rather than add to the anxieties of an already anxious time. That's going to continue, and this isn't a one and done conversation. It's certainly something that needs to be ongoing as the world continues to change in the ways that it is, and in the ways that we see that we can show up.
Yeah. So Zach, where have you seen God at work uh, in the world?
Um, Man, It was really, if you're not listening to us from the Mountain Sky Conference from the area Matt and I serve, and you're not clergy, we have something that we have to go to every year called clergy orders. And the easy answer is that is just clergy retreat where we gather together, do some continued ed stuff, and just gather as clergy across our four states plus a town in Idaho. And it was we journeyed to Salt Lake City last week and gathered for that. And it was different this year, just being together. It was just good. It's always good to see our friends and colleagues in that space, but it I don't know. We got to sit down and just be together this year, and really appreciated that and really saw the spirit move, not only in the conversations that I got to have and interactions, but just I saw that all around us as we sat at tables and in pews and all the places that we gathered. So I don't know. I really saw the spirit at work last week.
I think for me, it was just there seemed to be, and it was just like everywhere I occupied, um, there seemed to be some excitement and hope for what is to come. We just
Hmm.
don't, and different spaces meant different things. And to me, that was how the Spirit is working within us to remind us of that new creation that we're being created to be all the time. And I don't know, I just enjoyed being in that idea of newness and that idea of new space happening. And so, yeah, there's definitely a sense of newness going on right now.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, I like it. We're a church of life, death, and resurrection, and it's fun to lean into in the fullness of that.
yeah. So, for our listeners, we want to thank you for listening. Don't forget to like us or share us, and give us some thumbs up. Also, don't forget to go to our website at beardedtheologians.com and pick up some items for you or for friends. Or this is Clergy Appreciation Month, so if you have a celebration or you have a special clergy you want to buy something for, it's a great gift for them. We have lots of things for you. And so for the Bearded Theologians, I'm Matt Franks.
I'm Zach Bechtold. Thanks for checking us out.
I want you to subscribe and like this video and push that thumbs up.
Thank you for listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share on all social media outlets. You can check out old episodes and more information at beardedtheologians.com. Thanks for checking us out.